Hey guys, what's up? It's Rap again. In today's video, my homeowner association hated an antenna I installed on my property. They threatened to use a bulldozer to destroy my antenna and took it way too far. I taught them a lesson they will never forget. Here is what I did. Let's dive right into the story. Hey there, before I get into the meat of the story, I will start by explaining that I am an amateur radio operator, and when the problem with my HOA started, I was just getting into the hobby with the help of my uncle, who taught me how to get set up. This included building a small, 5-foot-tall antenna in my front yard to facilitate a wider signal. It had to be the front because the back is full of trees and clutter that would make it too difficult to maintain. If I knew then what I know today, maybe I would have bit the bullet and cleared to make space for it away from prying eyes, but too late for that. So, about a month after the antenna was put up, I had broadcast my thoughts and feelings over the airways for a few hours each Sunday afternoon in a relaxed radio show I like to call Tea with Ted. I was enjoying my newfound passion and life seemed to be nothing but positives, and then came a letter from my local HOA intended to scare any new homeowner into compliance and submission. The letter read like this: "Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that a large structure has been put up on your property. We kindly ask you to take this down as soon as convenient, in order to preserve the correct aesthetic vibe of the neighborhood and surrounding houses." But luckily, I knew the rules better than they thought, as I was living here before the HOA came into power. I could consider myself something of a free agent. In other words, I live here, but it does not mean that I am under the obligation to follow their rules or regulations. Of course, trying to explain this to an organization like my HOA only seemed to rub them the wrong way, as the next week I got a personal visit from the president herself, Miss Karen. After nonchalantly inviting herself inside, she began to disparage me for ignoring their request at removing the so-called eyesore from my yard, while I sat stone-faced, hoping pretending to listen to her rant long enough will see her leave without any exchange of verbal assault. Not that the chat started friendly after her warm-up, it took a sharp turn into a stern questioning that made me think her good cop bad cop routine was missing her nicer-natured partner. Between her barbs, I managed to feebly explain the antenna was used for my radio station, although I could tell that she disregarded it instantly when she told me, "Adults shouldn't play with toys." With her anger spent, she got up and left my house just as impolitely, with a plainly veiled threat to return should I ignore their request again. That following afternoon, I sought to follow her advice and rectify the problem, taking my tools out to the yard, and after working tirelessly for 2 hours through the rain, I had succeeded in removing the antenna. Removing the limitation on its height, that is, rather than demolish my livelihood, I instead built it to reach a whole foot higher into the sky, so that it could even be more visible to all my lovely neighbors. My hard work did not go unnoticed. As the days went by, more neighbors stopped from their mid-morning jogs to gawk at the marvelous structure as its bright red beacon blinked to show when I was transmitting across the county. Growing like a plant, I've been answering their varied letters by slowly adding more and more height onto the antenna, with it now standing at a towering 10 feet tall. Their reaction to this had always been to send more letters, filling and overflowing my mailbox each week until they suddenly ceased. An uneasy and uncomfortable silence lingered for that week as I cautiously awaited their next plan of attack. By no means had I expected them to simply give up like this, but if they did, I was waiting to celebrate. The second week of waiting, I am in the middle of a broadcast when I hear knocking at the door. Assuming it to be a delivery or neighbor, I carry on as usual, knowing that it would eventually resolve itself. This time, however, it didn't. The knocking in fact got stronger and more numerous the longer I waited, as if a sudden storm was battering my door with felled tree. I abruptly ended the show to investigate, split between curiosity and anxiety at this point. My fears were fully realized when I noticed it was Karen, the HOA president, following up her threat of a renewed visit. Suddenly, the idea of a storm or tornado did not sound so bad in comparison to the reality I was facing. With as much charm and bravado I could muster on the spot, I welcomed her in, and we got down to pleasantries cut short by her insistence to get to the heart of the matter. Her rant of expletives and demands lasted a good few minutes with no room for me to object or defend myself, while she threw senseless accusations against my hobby, my lifestyle, and my behavior. Despite the long-winded approach to her intentions, she did manage to make her message very clear before she stormed out again. Apparently, there would be no more warnings, no more letters, no more second chances. If I did not remove that antenna soon, it would be done for me. From my perspective, another threat without any substance, or so I thought to myself. While I saw no need to listen to their latest request, I did at least attempt to be amicable, deciding not to extend my antenna once more. Karen looked fairly determined with her threats on her last visit, and not knowing how her sanity was holding up following our tenuous war of exchanges, I did not wish to aggravate the situation any further. That is why when I returned from an extended shopping trip one afternoon, I was very shocked to find my beloved antenna reduced to a makeshift pile of scrap on my yard, large tire tracks stretching the distance from sidewalk to house, leaving a portion of my side fence also in tatters. As I stood dumbfounded at the rubble, a kind neighbor came over to explain the carnage, citing Karen as the mastermind who hired the bulldozer to tear it down secretly while I was not around. And I guess as secretly as you can with a bulldozer. So anyway, Karen and her HOA minions had finally overplayed their hand, and now they would find that their rules, their money, their power would only stretch so far. In the wake of the destruction, I arranged a hasty meeting with a nearby attorney who was only too happy to take the challenge against the bigwigs after I explained my situation in deliberate detail, citing my rights to broadcast within FCC regulations. With our collected evidence and absence of any wrongdoing, the court was easily swayed into making the right decision. The HOA lost the case with a majority verdict. For the destruction of property, continued harassment, emotional trauma, negligence to their responsibilities, and abuse of power, they were fined $200,000 with the reinstallation of a new antenna handled by the HOA as well. Karen, aka the HOA president, disappeared after the trial, quitting and moving out of the neighborhood hurriedly overnight, leaving the HOA to manage its own mess. Following the reinstallation of my antenna, the HOA was dissolved due to the large debt they had accrued, leaving the neighborhood in a peaceful status quo. And the next one is titled, No, You Don't Know Him. So this is not as crazy as some of the stories that I have read here, but here is my recent experience with an entitled person. Some background info before we get started. My stepsister and her girlfriend rent a house that my boyfriend and I purchased, rehabilitated and remodeled in a college town in central Missouri. They are on the lease with some fellow students at the local college. So in a 3-bedroom house there are 5 girls. My boyfriend is over often because he takes care of a lot of the gardening and the tasks that require some heavy lifting. He had warned me that the next door neighbor is a bit nosy and seems to be the old biddy type despite not being elderly. Just for those keeping track, that's 5 girls and 1 guy that routinely comes over. I have not really been to the house since we finished it until this last weekend. Someone had suggested that some small garden boxes along the side of the house would be nice so they can plant some herbs and maybe some vegetables come springtime. And I am all about that since I'm the green thumb of the couple. I went over and built some terraced garden boxes along the side of the house, each about 4 foot by 3 foot. So each bed was about 3.5 foot wide by 3/4 of a foot. Why am I doing this right before winter? Well, basically so we can make sure that the boxes are draining properly without losing too much soil from the box due to runoff. I am just finishing up when the old biddy makes her appearance. The conversation starts off rather normal, even though I can tell that she is digging for some gossip to be able to tell the women's group at church. Then she beckons me closer and says, I know you're just hired help and are just here to do a job, but do you know what this house is? No, what is this house? I ask. Well, I don't want to get involved, but I figured I ought to warn a pretty young thing like yourself that this is a brothel. Karen says, her voice lowered conspiratorially. I ask her what proof she has of this, and she explains that she saw a man here about a week or so ago, and yes, we collect rent on the 5th, and he was telling the girls that they had to pay him. She then goes on to explain that when he went to leave, my stepsister and her girlfriend both gave him a long hug. I ask her if she has anything else, and she says that she sees a mixture of people coming in and out, mostly men coming and staying for a couple of hours or so before leaving, which really ain't that unusual for 5 college students to have friends and classmates to come over for study groups and or group projects. My mistake is I ended up rolling my eyes and clearly appearing uninterested in listening to her further because she started to huff. I see you ain't concerned about those girls and their welfare. I bet that pimp has you in on it too. Well, I know the owner of this property and I'm gonna call them and report to them what's going on. This is where I knew I had her because my boyfriend and I own this place outright and I don't know her from Eve and she clearly did not know my boyfriend from Adam. Well, go ahead, Karen, why don't you call them over right now, I say to her. Oh well, they live in St. Louis and you know what that means, Karen says. No, I really don't know what that means. I push, trying to figure out if she innocently just means that it would take the owner too long to get here, or that the owner does not care. But St. Louis and or Kansas City have also become a bit of a dog whistle for black in this part of the state, and that's exactly what I think she means by it. Almost confirmed by her stuttering over her words and repeating, "You've got to know what that means." You should not have said nothing, Karen. You are exactly what is wrong with this state, and now I need you to take your bigoted ass back inside and leave us alone. And if I hear anything about you harassing anyone that lives or works here, I will have the police here hand-like and in a hurry to snatch you right on up, I said. This did have the desired effect of making her go away. What I failed to foresee though in my anger was Karen calling the police and claiming that I threatened her. My stepsister came out shortly after Karen went away and was talking to me about her and some of the rude comments that have been sent her and her girlfriend's way, from "bless your hearts" and "y'all need Jesus" to "you girls are going to hell." It was about this time that the police roll up and start asking me questions about what was going on with Karen, as they had gotten a report that someone matching my description had threatened her. So I relate to the officer more or less what happened above, and it's at this time that my stepsister asks the officer if she can show him something on her phone. The officer says yes, and my stepsister proceeds to show him a video with audio of the conversation, and this lovely 6-foot+ tall police officer that is also African American also picks up on the unspoken meaning of St. Louis owners, and he makes it clear that it gets his hackles up, and my sister then proceeds to show him videos of Karen's harassment towards her and her girlfriend. He gives a clipped, "Y'all can go inside, but don't go far, I will be right back." Us, all being biddies in training, immediately gather around the side window that allows us to overlook her front door. He marched up to her door and gave it 3 thudding claps against it before waiting for Karen to come out. Unfortunately, he did not have the conversation on the porch with her, but I will say this: even with all of her doors and windows closed, we could hear the officer's raised voice. He came back about 5 minutes later and told us that he had warned her to leave us alone and to stop harassing us. Before leaving, he gave my stepsister his card and said that if she starts up again, to give him a call and he will get us a no-contact order and charge her for harassment. For now, it's been 4 days and Karen won't as much as look into the direction of anyone in the house. Hopefully, this is the end of it. Update: I had another encounter with old biddy Karen. So this happened on Thursday, Thanksgiving for my fellow Americans, aka a day of gluttony that is supposed to be used to reflect on what we are thankful for, as we remember the myth of how this country was settled. For the people involved, I have talked about my stepsister Jules and her girlfriend Kira. In my last post, I briefly mentioned my boyfriend Jim as well. I would also like to introduce my business partner, Seamus, and his wife, Piper. Or Seamus, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that. So anyway, as is normal this time of year, many people are getting together for Thanksgiving. Jules and Kira were the only ones in their house. They stated that they wanted to host Thanksgiving. It was a small event with just us 3 couples. And well, everything is going great until after the sun goes down and we move from the dinner table to the fire pit in the front yard. The 6 of us are sitting around the fire and just talking. It is mostly Jules and Kira talking to Seamus about the business. I'm more focused on the marketing and monetary aspect of the business, while Seamus is the creative mind behind our game. Of course, with Jules and Kira getting excited about the ideas and the conversation also wandering into the accompanying lore novel, the volume of the conversation was getting a little loud. Granted, not illegally loud, sound ordinance does not start until 10 PM, but loud all the same. This loudness summoned forth the old biddy from her hermitage with all of the bitterness that no family wanting her presence creates. I'll never know what possessed her or deprived her of her good sense to come running up from the street with a cane, screeching like a banshee at the 6 of us, but it nearly cost her everything. Old Biddy got greeted by the barrels of 5 handguns pointed at her and the booming voice of my boyfriend telling her to freeze and don't move a muscle. Thankfully, the voice of someone that spent over a decade in the Marines and likely the sight of so many handguns did not make her stop, but then also turn around and run off back to her home. And yes, we immediately called the sergeant that left his card with us. And we were informed that old Biddy was making a call to report us for discharging weapons at her. We informed the sergeant that there were no shots fired, but multiple handguns were brandished as she came charging at us from the darkness with a stick of some kind. Personally, I'm glad shots were not fired or that there wasn't a real emergency, because it still took the police almost half an hour to arrive. Once the police arrived, it was only 2 units with a grand total of 4 officers. Old Biddy came running out of her house ranting and raving about how we were shooting at her and a whole bunch of other lies. The police, of course, got our side of the story, and while not the full security system some have suggested, we do now have a video doorbell that records when it senses motion, so it was basically recording all of us in the front yard and we showed that to the officer. It was really all the officer needed to see before he walked over to the officer that was taking her statement and informed her that old Biddy was being arrested for criminal trespassing and criminal menacing and needs to add "thankful to not have been legally shot dead on Thanksgiving" to her Thanksgiving list of things to be thankful for. In the nearly week since this happened, I was contacted by the owner of Karen's house asking for an affidavit of her harassment towards my tenants as well as her actions on Thanksgiving, just so the landlord can move forward with the eviction case. We have since upgraded the security system to include motion-activated IR/color security cameras that cover the entire outside and have overlapping fields of view. Been notified that Karen was unable to make bail and is currently being detained until at least her arraignment. And yeah, ripe stars, I would say that is very good news in regards to the awful neighbor Karen. And also that shows that it really pays off to have a security system in place. At least if you're dealing with a neighbor like this. Actually, personally, I've also been thinking of getting a security camera, but then again, where we live, there are actually security cameras outside of the houses anyway, so it's not really needed. Anyway, if you have enjoyed the stories, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support me. And the next one is titled, "Am I the butthole for getting an employee fired?" So my husband and I have a 15-year-old son who is biracial. My husband is African American and I am white. This will be important later on in the story. My son just got his driver's permit and has begun driving with me on a regular basis. The other day we were on the road and he accidentally cut off a truck, making him have to brake abruptly. I scolded my son and gave a sorry wave to the driver. At the next red light, which came about a minute later, the guy pulled up next to us. His car had a large company logo on it, indicating he was on the job. He rolled down the window and shouted the N-word at my son. My son's face went pale and he was quiet, depressed and clearly wounded deeply the rest of the drive home. The encounter sickened me. I did some research on the company and at one point I even plugged them into Facebook. They got a very active Facebook page and seem like an organization that prides themselves on a good image and good customer service. I called the company and reported the man's behavior, describing him very vividly. They informed me that they knew exactly who I was talking about and that all their drivers drive with a dashcam, so his behavior is on camera. I had a good feeling about the encounter and that they were gonna definitely take care of the situation. 2 months later, when I was browsing Facebook, kind of boredly one day, the company's name was recommended in my search and just for the hell of it, I clicked and looked at their page for the first time in 2 months. One of the very first photos or posts I saw from just a day ago showed a big group of their employees huddled together in their company yard with some kind of tag about a project they just completed. To my horror, I saw the employee who shouted at my son in the group grinning widely, meaning they did not fire him. The company is part of a nationwide chain, so I called their corporate headquarters, was connected to the highest person I could get to, and I reported the incident to them and complained about how they did not fire him. The man I spoke to sounded disgusted, way more so than the previous person I had reported him to, apologized profusely to me and thanked me very much for telling him. Additionally, he had made multiple statements about how racists and bigots have no place and no future in his company, giving me a strong feeling the offending employee's career is now toast. Was it right of me to double report this guy? I'm sure he was given at least some consequence the first time around, if not fired, and wonder if some might argue that I was going too far or being vindictive by reporting him again. Am I an a-hole or a Karen for not dropping this matter? And yeah, Ripe Stars, I'm curious what you think about this. In my opinion, it is good to have consequences for stupid behavior. In this case, it was an employee acting extremely stupid and insulting a young boy. And actually not even only insulting, but just being racist. So in my opinion, consequences for this behavior are a good thing. Let me know what you think in the comments, and now let's see what Reddit thinks about this. Comment number 1, not the a-hole, that kind of behavior has no place in this world, especially when you are in the company vehicle representing a business. I'm sure the higher up was glad you brought it to their attention. Comment number 2, everyone sucks here, he should absolutely 100% have never had anything mean to say to your son, let alone that, and if that's in character for him, he's truly a disgusting and terrible person. That being said, you are still worrying about this idiot 2 months later to the point that you went out of your way to get him fired? After you already reported him and you don't even know if he was reprimanded and reformed because it's not like there was a second incident, you just happened to see him in a picture. You don't know anything about him except that he used one word on one occasion and thought that warranted being jobless. The odds are he was working there out of necessity to sustain his life and possibly a family's rather than for his own amusement. Just my unpopular opinion, I guess, but that seems equally crappy to me. Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, my homeowner association hated an antenna I installed on my property. They threatened to use a bulldozer to destroy my antenna and took it way too far. I taught them a lesson they will never forget. Here is what I did. Let's dive right into the story.